All right, let's dive in. Today, we're tackling a topic that you've got to know for any serious finance or consulting role, the Treasury stock method. It's really the key to unlocking a company's true profitability. So let's get straight to it. So, when you're looking at a company's financial report, one of the biggest numbers they splash on the front page is earnings per share, or EPS. And it seems simple, right? Profit divided by shares. But here's the catch. That headline number, what we call basic EPS, it might not be telling you the whole story. In fact, sometimes it can be downright misleading. So here's the game plan for today. First, we're going to talk about why this is even a thing. That's the dilution problem. Then we'll get into the main tool, the Treasury stock method itself. We'll walk through a real-world example, put TSM into the broader context of other tools, and then wrap up with the most important part, key takeaways and some interview prep so you can nail this down. Okay, so first things first, why does this even matter? Why can't we just use that simple profit per share number? Well, it all comes down to a single powerful word, dilution. This is a huge deal, especially when you're analyzing those fast-growing tech companies that hand out stock options like candy to hire the best talent. If you ignore dilution, you're going to be in for a nasty surprise when that company's per-share profits don't grow nearly as fast as you thought they would. I love this analogy because it just clicks. Think about it. The company's total profit is the pizza. Basic EPS tells you the size of your slice based on how many slices there are right now. But what about all those slice coupons the company has handed out? The stock options and other things that can turn into new shares. Diluted EPS is our way of being a bit pessimistic. It asks, okay, what if everyone with a coupon shows up to the party? How tiny is my slice of pizza going to get then? So to break it down a bit more officially, basic EPS is really just a look in the rearview mirror. It's a snapshot based on the actual number of shares that were out there. Diluted EPS, on the other hand, is all about looking ahead. It's the more conservative what-if number. It forces us to account for all those potential new shares to see the worst-case scenario. And that's exactly what a smart investor wants to see, to understand what could hold back future growth. All right, we've got the problem, dilution. So what's the solution? Well, for stock options and their cousins, warrants, there's a very specific standardized tool that accountants and analysts use to figure out the potential damage. And that's where the Treasury stock method, or TSM, comes in. Now, this isn't just some good idea. It's the required method under U.S. accounting rules, or GAAP. And the core idea behind it is actually pretty clever. It works on a simple assumption. When employees exercise their options and give the company cash, the company doesn't just sit on that money. It immediately turns around and uses it to buy back its own shares from the open market. Okay, this next part, this is absolutely critical, especially if you get asked about this in an interview. The Treasury stock method only, and I mean only, affects the bottom number of the EPS fraction, the denominator. The company's profit, the net income on top, doesn't change by a single penny. And what does that mean? It means that if there's any dilution at all, the diluted EPS number is guaranteed to be lower than the basic EPS. No exceptions. So how does this whole hypothetical thing work? It's really just a four-step process. First, you only look at the options that are in the money. That just means the price an employee gets to buy the stock for is lower than what it's trading for on the market. I mean, it makes sense, right? Why would you pay more for something than it's actually worth? Second, you figure out how much cash the company would get if all those options were used. Third, you calculate how many shares that cash could buy back from the market. And finally, you find the difference, the net number of new shares that get added to the pile. Okay, theory is one thing, but let's actually run the numbers. This is where it all comes together and really starts to make sense. We're going to do a quick case study on a fictional company called Innovate Inc. So here are the vitals for our company, Innovate Inc. They have 100,000 basic shares out there, and they made $500,000 in profit. They've also got 10,000 stock options held by employees. For those employees, they can buy a share for $50. Meanwhile, the stock was trading on the market for an average of $100 during the year. Let's do the math. Step 1. Let's figure out the proceeds. We're going to assume all 10,000 of those in-the-money options get exercised. So 10,000 options at $50 a pop, that brings in a cool $500,000 in cash for the company. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so the company gets this hypothetical cash. What now? Well, the TSM says they use it to buy back stock. So you take that $500,000 in cash and you divide it by the average market price of $100 a share. That means Innovate Inc. could buy back exactly 5,000 shares. And notice, we use the average price for the year. That's to make sure the calculation isn't thrown off by one crazy day of trading. All right, so let's put it together. What's the bottom line here?
Well, 10,000 new shares were issued to employees when they exercised their options. But the company was able to buy back 5,000 shares from the market. So the net effect is an increase of 5,000 shares. And that's the number that gets added to our denominator.
And this is the payoff. This is the whole point. Innovate Inc.'s basic EPS was a nice round $5 per share. But once we account for the dilution from those options, the new share count is 105,000. The profit is still the same, but now you have to divide it by more shares, and the diluted EPS drops all the way down to $4.76. That's a real difference. So the Treasury stock method is our go-to for options. It's a fantastic tool, but it's not the only tool we have. You see, companies can issue all sorts of other things that can turn into shares, and for those, we need a couple of different methods. When you're dealing with things like convertible bonds or convertible preferred stock, you need a different approach. That's the if-converted method. And here's the key difference. It messes with both parts of the EPS fraction. You add the new shares to the bottom, just like with TSM, but you also add back the interest expense the company saved to the profit on top. And then, just to round things out, you've got this kind of weird one, the reverse TSM. This is for the total opposite situation, when a company is on the hook to buy back its own shares. The logic here is kind of flipped on its head. It assumes the company has to issue new shares to the public just to raise enough cash to fulfill its buyback promise. It's more complex, and yeah, it also affects the numerator. This little table here really makes it easy to see the difference. Just focus on that last column, numerator effect. The Treasury stock method is the odd one out. It has no effect on the profit number. The other two both require an adjustment up top. That's the main distinction you need to burn into your brain. Just one last little curveball for you, especially if you're looking at global companies. Both US and international accounting standards use the TSM, but they do it a little differently for year-to-date numbers. The US basically averages the quarterly results, while the international standard recalculates everything from scratch for the full period. It's a small difference, but it can lead to different EPS numbers for the exact same company. Okay, deep breath. We've covered a ton of ground. We talked about the why, the how, and the what else. So let's boil this all down to what you really need to walk away with and how you can talk about this confidently in a job interview. So if you remember nothing else, remember these three things. 1, TSM is for options and warrants, and it only touches the denominator. 2, it's a pretty simple calculation based on whether an option is in the money, which means it might actually be understating the full picture of dilution. And 3, TSM is just one tool in the toolbox. Don't get it mixed up with the if-converted method you'd use for convertible bonds. And of course, the part you've been waiting for. How do you actually talk about this in an interview? Here are 3 very common questions. For the first one, use that pizza analogy. It works every time. For the second, you're going to hammer home that denominator only versus numerator and denominator difference. And for the third, just explain that using the average price gives a more stable, representative picture and isn't skewed by one volatile day at the end of the year. You've got this. So I'll leave you with this final question to chew on. Think about a high-flying tech company that relies heavily on stock options to pay its people. The gap between its basic and its diluted EPS could be absolutely massive. So, now that you know exactly how that gap is calculated, how does that change the way you think about that company's real value and its actual profitability? That's the kind of question that separates a good analyst from a great one. Thanks for joining me.